Hello everyone and welcome to my Y&R Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The air in the grand foyer of the Abbott mansion, usually thick with the scent of old money and fresh flowers, was now charged with a static electricity of pure, unadulterated shock. It was a silence that wasn't quiet at all. It was a roaring, deafening void that swallowed the echo of Victor Newman's words that had just irrevocably shattered the foundation of multiple lives. The DNA test confirms that Claire is not my granddaughter. Each syllable had been delivered with that characteristic Newman finality, a gavel strike from the judge of Genoa City's highest court. And in the center of the maelstrom, standing completely alone, was Claire. Her face, which had moments before been a fragile canvas of hopeful anticipation, drained of all color, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of devastation. Her eyes, wide and glassy, scanned the room, not truly seeing the varied reactions around her, but feeling them: the sharp, piercing sting of Victoria's horrified gasp, the grim satisfaction curling on Adam's lips, the profound, gut-wrenching pity in Nick's gaze, and the furious, protective glare from Nikki, who looked as though she wanted to personally erase Claire from the family tapestry. It was the pity that cut the deepest, a confirmation of her ultimate failure, her final humiliating rejection from the kingdom she had so desperately wanted to belong to. The world seemed to slow to a syrupy crawl, each second stretching into an eternity of exposed nerve endings. She could feel the weight of every gaze, a physical pressure against her skin, branding her an imposter, a fool, a nobody. The elaborate story she had woven, the fragile identity she had clung to like a life raft in a turbulent sea, had been ripped away, leaving her raw and naked in her deceit. It wasn't just that she wasn't a Newman. It was that she was, once again, the person she had been running from her entire life. The unworthy, the abandoned, the girl perpetually on the outside looking in. The ornate patterns on the marble floor seemed to swirl and distort, and the murmured conversations, now starting up again like a swarm of angry bees, became a distant, muffled hum. Her heart was no longer beating but rather hammering against her ribs, a frantic, caged bird demanding release. Every instinct, every primal urge for self-preservation, screamed a single coherent command: run. It was the only language she understood in moments of catastrophic failure, the deeply ingrained response to unbearable pain. To stay was to accept the humiliation, to be dissected by their stares and dissected by their whispers. To run was to reclaim a shred of agency, even if that agency was just the power to disappear. Without a word, without a sound that could be heard over the rising din of the room's reaction, she took a single jerky step backward, then another. Her movements were stiff, robotic, as if she were a marionette whose strings had been cut. She didn't look at Victor, the architect of this public execution. She couldn't bear to see the cold, triumphant certainty in his eyes. She avoided Victoria's gaze, which was likely a confusing mix of betrayal and relief. She simply turned, a slow, deliberate pivot on her heel, and began to walk, her pace quickening with each step. The initial measured steps gave way to a hurried, almost stumbling gait as she moved through the mansion's opulent hallways, a ghost fleeing the scene of its own exorcism. The portraits of the Newman dynasty lining the walls seemed to mock her, their painted eyes following her retreat, a gallery of judges confirming her banishment. She heard her name called once, twice, perhaps it was Nick, his voice laced with a concern that felt more like salt in a wound than a bomb. But the sound was lost, swallowed by the roaring in her ears. She was operating on pure adrenaline now, a fugitive in the one place she had dared to call home. Pushing open the heavy front door, the cool evening air hit her face like a slap, a shocking contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. It was the breath she didn't know she needed, the catalyst that broke the last of her paralysis. She broke into a full, desperate run, her heels clicking a frantic, uneven rhythm on the cobblestone driveway. She didn't know where she was going. There was no destination, only the imperative of away. Away from the mansion, away from the lies, away from the crushing weight of a dream that had turned to dust in her hands. The manicured gardens, once a symbol of a beauty and order she craved, were now just a blur of shadows and muted colors as she fled through them. She reached the street, the pavement hard and unforgiving beneath her thin soles, and she ran until her lungs burned and her legs ached, the physical pain a welcome distraction from the emotional cataclysm tearing her apart from the inside out. She was a ship that had been allowed to glimpse the safety of the harbor, only to be deliberately dashed against the rocks. And now she was sinking, and the only thing left to do was to get as far away from the light as possible. Meanwhile, back in the foyer, the initial stunned silence had shattered into a cacophony of reaction. Victor remained an unmovable pillar, his expression one of grim satisfaction, as if he had just performed a necessary, if unpleasant, surgical procedure to remove a malignancy from the family body. He had proven his point, reasserted his control, and protected his legacy, and the collateral damage in the form of one heartbroken young woman was a price he was more than willing to pay. "I knew it," he stated, his voice cutting through the chatter, a pronouncement meant to end all discussion. "I knew she couldn't be trusted." But his declaration did little to quell the turmoil he had unleashed. Victoria stood frozen, a hand pressed to her mouth, her emotions a tangled knot. There had been a connection with Claire, a genuine spark of maternal affection that had felt so real, so right. Now it was tainted, twisted into a narrative of manipulation. Was their entire bond a lie? Was every vulnerable moment, every shared confidence, just a calculated part of Claire's scheme? The betrayal was a cold knife in her heart, but it was mingled with a confusing residual pang of loss for the girl who had just run out the door, a girl who had looked utterly shattered. Nikki moved to her daughter's side, her arm a protective bar around Victoria's shoulders. "Victor, was that entirely necessary?" she asked, her voice tight with a controlled fury. She had been skeptical, of course, but the public brutality of the revelation, the deliberate orchestration of Claire's humiliation, struck her as excessively cruel. There were other ways to handle this. She had seen the look in Claire's eyes in that final moment. It wasn't the look of a cunning mastermind caught in her web of lies. It was the raw, unguarded look of a child whose world has just ended. Nick, ever the peacemaker, the one who often saw the shades of gray in the Newman family's black and white wars, shook his head, his gaze fixed on the door through which Claire had vanished. "She looked destroyed," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. He had witnessed his father's tactics for decades, the scorched earth policies in both business and family, and while he understood the need for truth, he couldn't help but feel a deep unease about the method. This wasn't just about exposing a lie. It felt personal, a demonstration of power that had broken someone who already seemed profoundly broken. Adam, in contrast, could barely conceal his amusement. Leaning against the mantelpiece, a faint, cynical smile played on his lips. The entire drama was a welcome distraction, a spectacular failure for his sister Victoria, who had so readily embraced the interloper. He found a dark poetry in the situation, the mighty Victoria, so often portrayed as the family's compassionate heart, brought low by her own sentimentality. "Well, that was certainly more entertaining than the usual family dinner," he quipped, earning a venomous glare from his mother. For Adam, Claire was merely a pawn in the endless Newman chess game, and her dramatic exit was just the latest move. His mind was already turning, calculating how this shift in the family dynamic could be leveraged, how Victoria's vulnerability could be exploited. The human cost was irrelevant. In the Newman universe, emotional casualties were just part of the landscape. Out in the encroaching darkness of the Genoa city night, Claire's frantic run had slowed to a weary, disoriented walk. She had long since left the manicured opulence of the Abbott estate behind, finding herself in a less familiar part of the city. The bright, sterile glow of a 24-hour bus station provided a stark, unwelcoming sanctuary. She slipped inside, her breath still coming in ragged gasps, and collapsed onto a hard, plastic bench in a dimly lit corner. The adrenaline was receding, leaving in its wake a vast, hollow emptiness. She wrapped her arms around herself, a feeble attempt to hold the pieces of her shattered self together, but it was useless. The dam finally broke. Sobs racked her body, silent, heaving convulsions that she muffled into the sleeve of her jacket. They were not delicate tears of sadness, but great, gut-wrenching waves of grief for the life that had been dangled before her and then snatched away, for the family she had almost believed was hers, for the profound and utter loneliness that was now her only true companion. Her mind became a torturous cinema, replaying the moments leading up to the catastrophe. The hesitant hope as Victor called for everyone's attention. The way her heart had fluttered when he held up the envelope. The brief, terrifying second of eye contact with Victoria. who had offered a small, encouraging smile. And then the words, "The DNA test confirms that Claire is not my granddaughter." Each replay was a fresh blow, the humiliation and despair just as acute as the first time. She thought of the afternoons spent with Victoria, sharing stories over coffee, feeling a sense of belonging she had never known. Had it all been an act on Victoria's part? Or more painfully, had Claire's own desperate need for connection fabricated a depth that was never really there? She was adrift in a sea of doubt, unable to trust her own memories, her own feelings. The foundation of her recent existence had proven to be quicksand, and she was sinking fast. What was left for her now? There was no going back to the life she had before. That person was gone, replaced by a girl who had tasted a different kind of life and found it to be a cruel mirage. The future was a blank, terrifying void. Back at the mansion, the party had effectively ended, the guests dispersing with a wealth of fresh, scandalous gossip. The family, however, remained, the tension now shifting from the shock of the revelation to its aftermath. Victoria finally found her voice, turning on her father with a fury that had been simmering beneath her shock. "How could you do that, Dad? In front of everyone? Was that really the only way?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and unshed tears. Victor, unmoved, met her gaze squarely. "The truth is the truth, Victoria. She needed to be exposed. She was playing you, playing all of us. I will not have a con artist infiltrating this family." His logic was cold, impeccable, and utterly devoid of empathy. It was a classic Victor Newman maneuver. Identify a threat and eliminate it with maximum efficiency, regardless of the emotional fallout. He saw himself as the family's protector, a lion defending his pride, and in his world sentimentality was a weakness that could get you killed. But Victoria was not backing down. "You didn't see what I saw, Father. You didn't talk to her. There was a genuine person there, a lost, scared young woman. What if there's more to this story? What if she's a victim in all of this too?" The seed of doubt, planted by Nick's quiet observation and her own lingering feelings, was beginning to sprout. The sheer, unadulterated pain on Claire's face was not the look of a calculating schemer whose plot had been foiled. It was the look of someone whose soul had just been crushed. Nikki, while siding with Victoria on the issue of Victor's brutality, urged caution. "Victoria, darling, your father may have been harsh, but he's not wrong to be cautious. We don't know who she is or where she came from. She appeared out of nowhere with an incredible story. We have to be careful." The war within the family was now clearly drawn, between Victor's ruthless pragmatism, Nikki's cautious protectiveness, Victoria's wounded compassion, and Adam's opportunistic cynicism. As the argument swirled within the mansion's walls, Claire was making a decision in the harsh fluorescent light of the bus station. Wiping her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand, she stood up, her body feeling leaden with exhaustion. She approached the ticket counter, her mind a blank. "One ticket for the next bus out of the city," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. She didn't care about the destination. The only thing that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between herself and Genoa City. When the clerk named a city several states away and a departure time mere minutes from now, she simply nodded, paid with the little cash she had in her pocket, and took the flimsy ticket. It felt like a death sentence and a pardon all at once. She was cutting the cord, severing herself completely from the brief, beautiful and brutal dream of being a Newman. She was going back to being nobody, but at least it was a nobody of her own choosing. The bus, when it rumbled into the station, was a grimy, impersonal vessel, a perfect metaphor for her current state. She climbed aboard, the steps feeling like a mountain, and found a window seat near the back, pulling the hood of her jacket up to shield her face from the world and from the few other passengers. As the engine groaned to life and the bus pulled out of the station, she watched the familiar skyline of Genoa City recede through the smudged glass. The glittering lights of the Newman Enterprises Tower, once a symbol of a legacy she had hoped to share, now looked like a cold, accusing eye. She didn't feel a sense of relief, only a profound, bone-deep weariness and a grief so vast it felt like it would consume her. She was running away just as she always had, but this time felt different. This time she wasn't just running from something. She was running from the one thing she had ever truly wanted, and the loss was a physical ache in her chest, a hollow space that she knew would never be filled. The repercussions of her flight would, of course, ripple outward, creating new conflicts and uncovering old secrets. Victoria, haunted by the image of Claire's broken expression, would find herself unable to let it go. Her innate sense of justice and that lingering, inexplicable maternal pull would compel her to start asking questions, to look deeper into Claire's past, to find the real story behind the girl who had appeared and disappeared so dramatically. She would begin to quietly investigate, perhaps enlisting Nick's help, operating against her father's explicit wishes. This would create a new volatile fissure in the Newman family, pitting Victoria's heart against Victor's will. Victor, for his part, would see Claire's disappearance as a confirmation of her guilt. A truly innocent person, he would reason, would have stayed to fight, to plead her case. Her flight was an admission of everything he had accused her of. It would solidify his position and make him even more determined to shut down any further discussion of the matter. Nikki would be torn, understanding both her husband's ruthless logic and her daughter's emotional turmoil, her role often that of a strained mediator trying to prevent a total family implosion. Adam would watch it all with detached amusement, stirring the pot whenever possible, seeing a potential advantage in his sister's distraction and his father's single-minded focus on the Claire problem. And somewhere in the shadows, the true architect of Claire's plight, the person who had perhaps manipulated her into believing she was a Newman, who had their own reasons for wanting to infiltrate or damage the powerful family, would be watching these events unfold, satisfied that their plan, though altered, was still in motion. Claire's running away was not an end to the story, but a violent, chaotic beginning to a new, more dangerous chapter. She carried with her not just her own shattered heart, but the key to a mystery that threatened to expose long-buried secrets that could shake the very foundations of the Newman Empire. But for now, on that dark highway speeding away from everything, she was just a girl in a bus seat, utterly alone, her future an unwritten page, and her past a lie she could no longer bear to remember. The city lights faded into pinpricks and then were swallowed by the night, and Claire closed her eyes, willing the world, and the unbearable pain it contained, to simply disappear.